Want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon. We've got a great turnout of folks watching, and I know we'll have a bunch more that we'll watch later. But we're excited to have Michael Blackwell and the team representing the proposed development at 3G called the Trailhead with us here today. Let me start with all of you by thanking you for allowing us to reschedule this. Last week was a little extraordinary. Hopefully everybody is back to having power and water and no major issues there. But I know we have a lot of our chamber members that were impacted. So we appreciate the flexibility on y'all's end. I'll go ahead and kick this off. What I'll ask everybody to do, we will have some time. We're going to try to set aside some time at the end for some Q&A. So if you would submit your questions through the app or through the question window there, I can tell you based on the number of attendees we've got, it's unlikely we'll be able to get to everybody's, but we'll try to get to as many as we can, and we'll try to circle back with those that we can't. So with that, I'm gonna introduce Michael Blackwell. Michael is with the Mill Creek Residential Trust as a senior managing director. He's an East Dallas resident, member of the the White Rock Lake Foundation Board, past member of the Oak Cliff Chamber of Commerce Board, and like I said, he's been around here. So, Michael, I know you got several members of your team on as well with you. I'll let you go ahead and kick it off with introductions, and then jump into your presentation.
You bet. Hey, a couple of housekeeping things, Brad. I've got the presentation, so I'm guessing when it's time to pull that up, I'll just do the share screen.
Correct.
Okay. And then we had talked about 30 minutes to cover the presentation. Obviously, it's a different format than the typical luncheon. I hate that that's the case. It's been too long since I've been to a chamber luncheon, but my team will laugh at the thought of me getting through something in 30 minutes. But I've got my iPad here with well, you can't see it because of my fancy screen background, but I've got my iPad with a shot clock on it to try to help me manage that. But I'm not starting it yet. When I get going, I will do that. What I'm gonna do, Brad, is I'm gonna share my screen, and then I'm gonna introduce a few of the people that we've got on the team, because it's a real important part, I think, of how we are attempting to handle this, how we've always sort of envisioned it. I asked them to be here so that you all on the other end of the call can see our team. I, though, will be the chatterbox here today. And so in keeping with the idea of the rubber chicken lunch, I'll be the one up at the podium, so to speak. But I want you to see their faces. I want you to know who they are. I want you to know where they live and why they live where they live. I also want you to recognize them in the upcoming open house meetings that we're going to have. So we have had a commitment from the beginning, and we will never get this perfectly, especially in East Dallas. But to go deep and wide and personal as much as we possibly can in the neighborhoods and with the interest groups and the associations that converge around this intersection and this kind of precious part of our city. And so we spent a lot of time, and we're not looking for sympathy, or we're not looking for accolades for the effort. I hope, if anything, it establishes a precedent for what it takes to come in and approach a major investment in a thoughtful way in a neighborhood in an area that can be a bit challenging to propose a major investment, honestly. But I'm saying that to a group of Chamber of Commerce people. But what I do want to emphasize, though, is that we have always planned that after a series of deep and wide meetings that are more of a conversation, where we're looking for feedback and trying to formulate our plans and understand the sensitivities beyond that what was obvious to us in the beginning, that we would then ultimately pivot towards some open house meetings, which begin this next Saturday. And so most of you on this call, I suspect, would have seen that, but we are happy through the chamber to communicate that. We'll be having one Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m., followed by 2 evenings, Monday and Wednesday, the 1st and the 3rd. Those also got pushed because of changing priorities last week. And I think on Saturday, we all probably, without knowing each other, were running into each other at Home Depot and Lowe's and just generally outside. But that's where we're headed. And so I say that, Brad, because I'd love for the people on the call to know that there will be more at that point. We will also, those will be open-ended questions. We are not going to cut those things off until questions have been asked. And that's just how we're going to handle it. But also the people that are on the call on my team here are going to step into a little bit more of a primary role in those open houses as we present. Instead of just conversing, we plan at that point, having gotten a lot of feedback, but not finished, we will be presenting a little bit more visuals, more a sense of what's it going to look like, which everybody wants to know, right? We have, prior to that time, we have been walking through conversations with people to talk about scale and use and planning and trails and how we might approach this. And so anyway, an open invitation will follow that. The open house will have more time to ask questions. You should expect to see more information. And I want for you to recognize the people that you see on the screen now who will be walking you through a lot of those things. Make sense?
Michael, and I'll commit that we'll also share. You've sent me the links to the Zoom open house meetings, so
yeah.
We'll also share that with our chamber members as well, so that anybody that's watching this on this call or later can hopefully hop onto one of those. So
perfect. And apologies in advance for those of you. My wife is taking care of basketball duty on Saturday, where we have a double header because it's on either side of our community meeting. But we wanted to make the idea with doing 3 of these and doing them one on the weekends and a couple in the evenings is to make sure that anybody that could possibly want to join gets that opportunity. So hope that makes sense and look forward to that. All right, let me share my screen and start my shot clock. That's how I just bought 8 minutes of time, I guess. All right, here we go. Brad, I'm going to look to you. Give me, are we seeing my screen? Good deal. Okay. The place that we started over a year ago, and the place that I start on all projects, especially in an environment where there's tremendous amount of narrative and historical context of existing fabric, is to start with that regional context and understand what is it that drives people's passions here? What are the lifestyles that exist? What are the neighborhoods? What's the history? Where's the planning been over time? Where are the opportunities? What's missing? What would be additive? And so you'll notice there aren't political lines on here defining district boundaries and things like that. We haven't approached it, and generally we don't approach these projects from a political perspective. We approach them from a lifestyle perspective. And so I'm going to explain to you how this whole team that you're looking at was carefully curated from this neighborhood. Everybody lives in the neighborhoods surrounding you. And broadly speaking, we live here for the same reasons that you do. We love it for the same reasons that you do. We have a lot of the same sensitivities and concerns that you do. And so we wanted to get those names on a map, right? We wanted to, I've never been a part of a project. I've been involved in a lot of neat places, both in Dallas and elsewhere, that have 100 years of layered context and history. Never one that had this many communities, this many interest groups, this many parks and trails, people. And yet that's part of what drew us here. And so we start with the neighborhood, and we start with the lifestyle that exists around those neighborhoods. And then we went to assemble a team. So I'm going to run through the team real quick. These are the boring labels. What's on the next page is what matters, and the faces that you see on the screen. But this is a business group. And so I also want to recognize Mill Creek Residential Trust was founded as Trammell Crow Residential about 40 years ago in this town. We rebranded coming out of the great financial crisis, launching into this cycle as Mill Creek Residential. That was an homage to the founding origins of our company. Trammell Crow Sr. had a tree farm in East Texas that he loved dearly, and it was called Mill Creek Farm. Our company was founded this cycle in Dallas. Our office here in Dallas is 95 strong. It's 4 times as large as any other office in the US, but we are a national company whose historic investment in this town and current investment in this town is completely anchored in this town. So my team, the people, we will build it ourselves if we have we're given the opportunity. We will invest in it ourselves. We will operate it ourselves, and we all live here. Similarly, we assembled a team of people that are qualified professionals. Obviously, we're not going to bring people in just because they're neighbors. We needed people that know how to do what we're talking about doing, which is a reasonably large scale and a very nuanced and complex site. So Good Fulton and Farrell is our architect, TVG Partners is our land planner and urban designer, Kimley Horn is our civil engineer and our transportation consultant. Baldwin Associates is our land planning or zoning consultant. and Winstead, Tommy Mann at Winstead is our land use attorney. Beyond that, there are more people that we have consulted and had engaged, but to be sure, these are paid consultants working on behalf of this project for this team. Here's what matters more, and I want them to just wave as we kind of go down the list. These are your neighbors. It was imperative to me as a neighbor myself. I live in Lower Lake Highlands, just behind the White Rock Skate. When I returned to Dallas after a 10-year hiatus in DC, to a place where my family's roots run back to the late 1800s, we decided we were going to rear our children in Texas, and I was going to commit myself to Texas and more specifically to Dallas. We wanted to live where there was some topography, and we wanted to live by the lake. That's why we chose it. That's why we're here, and that's why most of the time outside of work has been invested in and doing life around the lake. Church plants in East Texas. My wife works out at the Y, the Lakewood Y, or White Rock Y rather. I don't get there as often, but I spent a lot of time around the lake. But it was critical to us to assemble a team of people that know these things, so that from the very beginning, the way we think about the lifestyle and what we can create in terms of experiences and the sensitivities that drive the way we think about the site, things like height, things like traffic, things like apartment uses, things like precedent setting, right? These are ideas and things that we were passionate and focused on well over a year ago, before COVID began, when we started to look at what to do with this site. That doesn't mean we have all the answers. We've only started lots of those conversations, but we've all got that sensitivity. So I'm going to work down the list. Kevin, my colleague, is on the screen. Kevin, if you wave, born and raised in Dallas, also lives in Lake Highlands, very actively engaged in a lot of different things in East Dallas. He's also been a big part of thoughtful mixed use planning and district level planning in other parts of Uptown and Knox Henderson and other places like that. I'll jump down to GFF, Good Fulton and Farrell. Jonathan Wood is on the call. Jonathan lives in Forest Hills. He's been active in the Forest Hills HOA. Jonathan is leading our team and has been from the beginning. He's raising children in Forest Hills. His kids, I think, go to St. Thomas. Entrenched in this neighborhood. He's the one who like swings by me going very fast on his road bike in a GFF outfit. And I know it's him after he's passed me. But we also brought in two designers that are helping us really think through the architecture. And both of them live in East Dallas as well, in Lockwood and in Eastwood. Further down, Gavin Newman grew up at the YMCA. It's where he spent all of his time, and some of those past experiences and thoughts have informed the way we thought about the project. TBG Partners, wonderful landscape architect, the CEO of TBG, who's been in Texas for a very long time. There's a guy named Mark Meyer. Mark's not on the call. He had to be at another meeting. Chess Campbell, I believe, is. Chess did live in Hollywood, Santa Monica. He now lives just behind Little Forest Hills. Mark Meyer grew up at Loving and Winstead. He explored the fish hatchery and developed a love for nature and landscape and became an urban planner and landscape architect. He worked actually at the yacht club at what was the Lock most recently when he was a teenager in high school, right? He's got 30 years of growing up here and his father still lives at Loving and Winstead. Next up is Tommy Mann. Tommy, I think, is on the screen. Tommy's a well-known land use attorney in the city of Dallas, trained in land use, not just legally, but in terms of planning. Tommy's kids go to St. John's on the east side, northeast side of the lake. He currently lives there. And then where do we get Kimberly Horn, Sarah Scott? Sarah's in the context of East Dallas, she's our urbanist. She's hanging out on Lower Greenville, just next to Lower Greenville and Ross Avenue. Sarah is a wonderful civil engineer in our city. She is helping us to work through our civil engineering, transportation planning, traffic impact analysis, and obviously those things are of critical importance to a lot of people on this call and to us. Who else? Jennifer and Rob. Many of you may know Rob. Rob has been in the neighborhood. He lives in Lakewood Heights, has been in the neighborhood. Kids went to St. Thomas for a long time. They're now out of school, but Rob is a well-known land use consultant and lives and works in East Dallas. And Jennifer, I think, has relocated. She switched from the west side of the lake to the east side of the lake during the pandemic. She now lives in Eastwood after having moved from Lakewood Heights. So sorry to take so much time to go through that. It's critically important from our perspective. A little plug for the chamber. I have many of us work and live. I didn't mention Mill Creek. We are in the Mockingbird Station office tower. We moved from downtown Dallas, where we'd been for about 30 years, into Mockingbird Station about 2 years ago. So I feel awfully lucky that, pandemic or not, we stay on the east side of Central Expressway and are very rooted on the east side of town. So let me shift now to kind of the big idea, and then I'm going to try to we're going to block and tackle our way through some slides to begin to talk about the existing conditions, the planning context, not just recent planning, but for decades of planning, and what has been called for near this intersection and around these areas, and the parks and trails that are continue to kind of emerge and be planned around the site and around the area. And then I'm going to switch and I'm going to hit some high points on the vision, our vision for the project. It's my hope I address most of the concerns or questions, but I know that I won't get them all. And then we'll try to get to as much as we can. There's a phrase in real estate development that's been around popularly for about 20 years now called TOD. It means transit-oriented development. We viewed this before the pandemic as part of an overall kind of focus that we developed, that the life-giving value of open space, access to open space and trails and a natural setting, right, is going to get more and more meaningful, more and more valuable for people. And so we kind of recoined that phrase, and I don't want to claim credit for it. Other people have done this as well. But TOD for us is trail-oriented development. Then the pandemic happened. Then it went from something that might register on somebody's radar about where they choose to live and how they would choose to live, how they might choose to go to work, how often they may choose to go to work, and really has kind of changed. My personal story is I spent in the 6 years preceding the pandemic, I bet I looped the lake. I live right there by the connection at Flagpole Hill. I actually live on Landshire, which is Lauther Lane Extended. And I probably looped the lake on my bike 6 times in 6 years. Since the pandemic, weather permitting, I do it 4 or 5 times a week. And so it's been incredibly apparent to me and quite frankly, healthy in my life since the pandemic happened. And so when you begin to think about that and you think about mobility and you think about planning and you think about it in the context of our city, and you look at the effort that's happening with some of these trails to create a connected loop around the city, and then you begin to drop this site or understand this site in that context, even before we had this graphic and figured out how it was stitched together, the idea of a trail-oriented development was we were really focused on. Once we really began to understand the investments being made in that direction, it just took it to another level. All right, so brass tacks or site identification. We are talking about, I think everybody's clear, there is 3.88 acres at the convergence of Gaston, Garland, and Grand, formerly home to the Lot Restaurant and the Local Traveler Restaurant. As many of you may know, the Lot and Local Traveler, the land and the businesses were majority owned by neighbors of all of ours. I think as many as 7 people are involved in the ownership of the 2. Rob has worked with them for a long time. Wonderful people and people that we got engaged with prior to the pandemic. This is not a situation where 2 restaurants were doing fine and then struggled in a pandemic and an apartment developer showed up while they were down. This was the conversation that began prior to a pandemic about the highest and best use for a property that pushes, a shotgun property that pushes back off of the street, away from the intersection, into a nested sort of tree screen site along a trail. And that when you look at the existing conditions of the site area, you look at any of the master planning, I think it was clear to them that there was a higher and better use that was a mixed use, trail-oriented type development that needed to be explored. Combining the 2 sites together to improve traffic flow so that the 2 different driveways at the top and at the bottom can be connected, which currently isn't the case, and planned in a way that can be coordinated with the new alignment of the 3G intersection, which eliminates the bypass lane on Garland Avenue, creates a screen, a pretty significant green buffer between where this property line currently is and the nearest street, and ultimately radiates or orients the intersection, the actual intersection, away from the site. The existing zoning on these sites is the lot property is considered MU1 or is zoned MU1, mixed use, which is a mixed use zoning designation that allows for all the uses that we are talking about. It is restrictive. It has some deed restrictions that are at this point a little over 20 years old that limits it to 55 feet in total height. The Local Traveler property, which is the long property on Plan South that we are looking at now, is, as you can see, a very narrow and deep site that ultimately has an acute tip back into the sort of tree line along the trail and then wraps around the lot property. It is zoned CR, community retail, which is the prevailing zoning that has existed in this area for a long time, which generally supports, allows for, and is, broadly speaking, encouraged the commercial uses that have typified this intersection. We are asking to consolidate those two together, rezone them into a planned district, limit our height to a mid-rise building, which would cap out at 85 feet in total height, and other things that we're happy to address in terms of the zoning request. I'd point out across the street, the vacant lot that's there that everybody's familiar with right on the corner is similarly zoned, or it's got a similar opportunity. It's a CR zoning, but allows for multifamily uses up to 85 feet in height. Final thing I'll point out, many of you know this to be the case, but we have studied it to a level that feels ridiculous at this point, and yet it's such a key part of understanding and planning this site. But you can see in the background the topographical lines. There's about 20 feet of fall going towards the spillway. What we'll talk about later is the reality that there's about a 50-foot fall in all directions from all 3 G streets, from the top of the spillway, from the Lakewood YMCA, and from effectively Mata Elementary School on Grand Avenue. We're in a bathtub, half a mile from the spillway, 50 feet down the hill, pushed away from the street, nested back into a 40 to 50-foot tree screen. Final thing I want to point out here that is unknowable without the aerial, when you have ever driven back behind this property, and I'd like to encourage everybody that's on this call to go and do this. Be alert as you do it today. There's been a lot of unwanted activity that has gotten encouraged back there because it is just this sort of open space along a dark patch of the Santa Fe Trail. But in order to drive back there, if you did it in the past or you do it today, you drive off of the property onto what is essentially an 1.5 acres of flat dirt right away immediately next to the property line. We see that as a wonderful opportunity to not miss in the way that we think about and the way we work together with parks, the city's parks department, with the Dallas Park Board, the Park Board, DART, and other jurisdictions that can help us to think through, not for our benefit, but for the public benefit, what can we do with that sort of adjacent space that's right there that really creates a wonderful trailhead opportunity. Here's what exists today. I'd encourage you again to go and walk along this Santa Fe Trail. This is just to the south of our site, so this would be heading north towards the lake right before you get there. On the left, these photos were taken following the pandemic. And I'll choose my words carefully here. This is not the fish hatchery debacle, but the existing owners of the property and we were very frustrated upon coming back here in effectively this summer and seeing that contractors on behalf of the city that were doing utility work had taken it upon themselves to park on the private property and clear cut, look at the left, basically clear cut through the forest to ultimately get over to a bigger swath that they could clear cut back across towards the creek. I don't have these in here to do anything other than point out, especially for those who don't use the trail frequently. These are very familiar images for people that do use the trail, and for the Friends of the Santa Fe Trail in particular. This is a dark patch on the trail. It's a patch that always has had relatively easy access to unwanted activity that was occurring in the woods. It makes it very unsafe condition. After 5 p.m., generally speaking, people aren't comfortable going there. It has now gone to another level, which looks like it's been indiscriminately kind of pillaged from a forest perspective. What you're going to see in our plans is a desire to go in a completely different direction, to treat the trail as our great street, to emphasize and celebrate the connections to the trail, to create eyes on the trail and activity along the trail that makes it feel comfortable and protected. And at the same time, to preserve all of those trees along the trail and at the sort of the tip of the property, so that we maintain this forested, nature preserve type environment that drew us all to the neighborhood and has still drawn us to this site. A quick run through of zoning. Planning rather. I've got 3 slides here, and it became clear to us, and it's always, I think, important to look at, don't just take our word for it, and frankly, from our standpoint, being responsible about neighbors and frankly, just responsible development people, we need to look at the plans that have been laid out. We need to go and consult those, talk to those people. We need to look at the master plans that are in place and that are happening now that might have some impact on things. When we began to do that, what we began to see was strategic and long-term plans done both by the city, last done in 2006, the comprehensive plan, the Forward Dallas Comprehensive Plan, and community-based initiatives like the Ferguson Road Initiative and Garland Road Vision. We wanted to go back and look at those. Those aren't new plans, but they are long-term and strategic in nature. Well, they speak to these things. They speak to what kind of uses and streets and goals are desired in this area specifically. And as we began to look at those things, we started to see a lot of repeat patterns. This node called urban in the middle of the Lake and Garden District, or I should say surrounded by the Lake and Garden District, and single family houses not suitable for large scale commercial and mixed use development. But it calls out urban nodes and mixed use nodes that are suitable for mixed use, mid-rise, trail-oriented, traffic relieving development. So we then go to, and we met with those people. We've met with the Garland Road Vision. We spent quite a bit of time with them. We continue to want to follow up with them and align as much as we can our thinking and planning around those elements of the plan from, really at this point, 15, 16 years ago. And then we said, well, what about mobility? Right? Mobility is an idea that's not a new one. Dallas has been slow on a national and an international level to adopt more aggressive forms of what is called active transportation and alternate forms of mobility. And yet the main way that we've decided to do that and determined is can be most effective is by really engaging and celebrating and encouraging the use of our unique trail system. In particular, where it knits together the limited number of nodes that are suitable for this kind of development. And so, interestingly, there are two efforts that we spent some time kind of understanding. One is the loop, which is this idea being driven by the Circuit Trail Conservancy to stitch together different trail pieces so that ultimately there is a continuous way to circulate around the city that then has branch off points to major trail nodes like the new Trinity Forest Spine Trail, which we couldn't be more excited about, and is about 50 feet. The branch to that is about 50 feet to the south of us. There's also a brand new plan called the Connect Dallas Strategic Mobility Plan, not approved and codified by the city yet, but they just closed down the public input session on the draft version of it. Multiple things are interesting in it. In particular, it has been wrapped up. The latest version of this was done over the last 12 months when we've all been wrestling with the ideas associated with the pandemic. What's going to change? How frequently are people going to go to work? Will people work from home more often? Will they take different forms of transit? Will people choose to be near parks and trails more than bars, restaurants, and employment, which has been big drivers? And we just again saw these goals that pop out: housing, economic vitality, environmental sustainability, safety, mobility, green space. The other thing I want to point your attention to, and I apologize for the blurred graphics, but a little description on the top from the area, the broader planning area that surrounds the lake in the Connect Dallas plan that really drove something home to me. That patch that we were just looking at, those pictures we were just looking at of this dark patch on the trail, if you read the second, the sentence here in the middle, this says, together these form a major recreational corridor. Let me say this: White Rock Lake Park is a major feature in the center of the area, along with White Rock Creek that bisects the area from the north to the south. Together, these form a major recreational corridor and the backbone of the city's trail system. We were just looking at the pictures of the backbone of the city's regional trail system. We think there is so much more to be done. Finally, shifting gears to what I think drove us to the site, what drove us to the neighborhood to raise our children here. And whether you live in a 100-year-old neighborhood with tutors or a 100-year-old neighborhood with Hutzel houses or boulevard planted streets from the 20s and 30s, or you live in one of the neighborhoods that's far more dense and far newer, that is along the creek. What we all have in common, what we all value, is the green environment that surrounds us, right? The natural setting and the nature preserve-like environment. Well, there are 3 master plans that have been recently finished or about to be finished that we think are really, really interesting to study. So we've studied them and we've met with the people that have drawn those plans. The Trinity Forest Spine Trail was just approved in the end of last year. Remarkable value and connectivity for all of us that live on the east side of Dallas. the Samuel Grand and Tennyson Glen Golf Course, which has been done by Mesa Design. Stan Cowan lives up on near Tokalon Park on Tokalon, just off of Winstead. We've consulted with Stan and want to continue to do so. In the case of Trinity Forest Pine Trail, Half Associates led a lot of the planning for that. Bud Melton's a longtime Mount Auburn resident. We spent time with Bud and continued to talk to him and try to listen and get some feedback from him. And then finally, and most importantly to us, the Friends of the Santa Fe Trail is going through a comprehensive update to their master plan as they, recognizing they really do form the backbone of the trail system, launch a vision for what that trail can be and where certain kinds of planning are suitable and where they're not. What we found in all of those plans, when you begin to stitch them together and you look at the goals that they espouse, economic development, housing, mobility, activation of trails, safety and security, eyes on the trails, preservation of natural environments, and you stitch them together around our site, and it begins to point to something that really has given us a good bit of encouragement in the midst of plenty of reasons to be discouraged. And so my next slide is new. It's hard to read. I felt like it's important to share with this group because this group has some degree of economic development that underpins its reason for being as a chamber of commerce. We've all said how much we love this part of town, and I do too. Dallas has led the economic expansion in the United States this entire cycle. And part of that has been the creation of new housing of all types. These charts specifically show multifamily housing to accommodate an expanding workforce. They do not get built if they do not get filled and the workforce is not there to accommodate them. As a result, what I'm trying to sort of represent and show here is within a 6-mile radius since 1990, there have been 239 projects built within the swath that you see represented there. So that's going to count downtown, uptown, near East Dallas, basically tollway to the east. That only considers projects more than 120 units. If we expand that, it's many, many more than that. Similarly, if you just kind of narrow it to the last 20 years, there have been over 200 projects, also over 120 units. When we look at that analysis within a 2-mile radius of this site, and we drop the count of units down to 35 units just to capture something, in 30 years, there have been 9 projects. In the last 20, there have been 4. If you think about this, most of you can recognize all 4 of these. The Magnolia Apartments behind Cane Rosa, the Drake condominium project that is now renting as apartments. And I want to be very careful about my reference to that building on a couple of different levels. But to be clear, that was not planned as a rental building. It is now. The third was in the beginning of this cycle, economic cycle, a firm called Graystar Development built the Lakewood Flats just past Mata Elementary School. That was about 400 units. Those projects combined are the only 500 units in 28 years that have been developed within 2 miles of this site. So when you look at investment, economic investment, and you look at housing, we know that there are traffic problems. We've got a bit of a different perspective on what create traffic problems or what perpetuate traffic problems. And we think that that's born out of real empirical, pretty well accepted data. But there really isn't a whole lot of question about the investment in meaningful scale new housing in our tight little pocket of East Dallas that we love so much. And so I want to be super careful about that. I've never shared that information. I'm nervous about sharing it with a group of people that we've always been a bit nervous, are going to bring the pitchforks out from the beginning. But the notion that this is precedent setting and that we've already got enough apartments and that apartments create the traffic that we've seen empirically can be represented to simply not be the case. Okay, I got to power through. So now we're going to go to site analysis and then to our project vision. This is where I'm going to try to deal with height. Okay, we entered this opportunity to deliver something that we thought could be exceptional, where it actually has been called for quite some time, with the complete knowledge that height scares people, change is uncomfortable, and traffic pisses people off. We have the same perspective as humans. And so from the beginning, we have tried to do a couple of different things. One is understand the context so that fears can be properly sensitized and processed. Secondly, is to then respond with our site to try to mitigate those impacts and those effects. And so I hope that when we walk through this, we'll at least be able to demonstrate that the effort has been very thorough. Ultimately, the community effectively has the opportunity to judge what they would prefer to see here. And that will play out over the course of the next few months. What this busy chart, though, does is it looks at the regional topography that surrounds the places that we live. Most particularly, it looks at the experiences around the lake. If you live on the west side of the lake and you face towards the east, it is not accidental that you have a static view, meaning a fixed, generally speaking, a fixed view towards the things that are happening on Garland Road. Nor is it a surprise that you can see them relatively well. The reason is our lake is oriented in a north-south direction. The homes that are on the west side of the lake look to the east, broadly speaking, and Garland Road is far higher than any other arterial that surrounds the lake. Well, that fundamentally changes what you look at and what you see. So what we began to do was to walk around the lake and establish the regional topography of the lake, whether you're on a foot, on a bike, or on a car. Look at the roadways, look at the lake, and determine for the purposes of our site, which is half a mile down from the spillway, 50 feet at least lower than the spillway, 70 feet lower than Casa Linda Church, pushed back, the site and the buildings pushed back away from the intersection, so further kind of back into the trees and away from that view. Where could you even see from the lake or from the surrounding roads in the direction, if we built a tall building or not, that you would be able to see it? And so that's what this attempts to establish. The little pink triangles are those view perspectives that are aimed in the direction where if you could see it, you would. The little blue triangles establish the points around the lake so that you sort of have an understanding of what the topographical points are there. And then we attempted to walk around the lake and identify some of the landmark buildings that all of us recognize because we all circulate this area while we kind of live our lives. So A is the Drake here at the bottom. B is our site, or excuse me, this is our site identified as the site. B is the Casa Linda Church. That's a project that some of you may know is now under construction. It preserved the old Casa Linda Church and will be on Garland Road. It's 3 stories in the front. It steps back a little bit there. And then C, the C.C. Young buildings that are on the north side of the lake. The intent here, as we move forward, was to simply understand what do you see and what will you see and what's the relative change in height of these buildings, given how tall they are and where they sit in the area. This is a quick slide that just shows those same view directions so that people can understand what you can see and what you cannot. We spent a lot of time over a year ago or 7-8 months ago trying to determine if we should render our building into these pictures. The challenge, as you might be able to see here, is that it's when you can't see it, you can't render it particularly well. What I want to set up, though, is the Drake building. Most of the people that have referenced a concern associated with height have either been 8 stories at 3G, that I can't, that sounds unfathomable, or you can see the Drake from all over, and this is going to be even taller than that, okay? And so we have wanted to be careful, and I am not taking a position on that, and I want to be very careful about that project, but I think it is important to understand, and I'll show you in a second, we're going to be 30 feet lower than the Drake. Even what we're asking for, the net effect is 30 feet. So anytime you go out on your own and you can visualize the Drake and the property, count 3 window bays down, and that's where we would be. And once people have understood that, combined with the orientation of the views, it has tended to change people's immediate sort of perception, because the immediate perception is that they must be coplanar at the same height, that you'd see it from every direction, or that the building sits right up there at Gaston, Garland, and Grand and just has 8 stories floating up over the intersection. If nothing else, we should be able to prove now and in subsequent conversations that that's not at all what the experience will be. And that's where we want to go. This is an attempt. It's a busy slide. It's a new one. I haven't shared this either, but we all circulate around here. Pick your G, whether it's Grand or Gaston or Garland, the orientation of the view experience as you come towards this intersection and the topography that happens from the YMCA, from Mata Elementary on Grand, and from the spillway on Garland, create a situation that frames a view corridor. while in a car, which is this 3G focus. Our attempt has always been to pull away from that intersection. The site pushes us away, forces us to do that anyway. We've got a 40 to 50 foot tree screen along the trail, which we love, which we will preserve, which we will love and protect. We want that natural setting. That's part of what drew us here. But all of these things fundamentally change the way that this building gets experienced. So then what exists around us? Everybody knows. So since the Bankhead Highway days, this has been our arterial auto-oriented series of streets. Every planning effort that has looked at it has attempted to set in motion the things that might allow us to think differently about it. And yet over and over again, the economic proof is in the pudding. And we have storage facilities, liquor stores, and gas stations that are 35 years old, and we have some that are 3 years old. We have strip centers and drive-through chain restaurants that fall into those same sort of time-lapse categories. It's not a mystery. It's an economically proven model. It's available in our current zoning and in most of the current zoning that surrounds the site. And it is proven without any doubt to create traffic impacts ultimately that are very different than traffic impacts that come from mixed use residential development. It also, generally speaking, has no capacity to create synergies with a trail system. By contrast, what we see here, even though it's a complicated site with tremendous topographical challenges, a shotgun site that's kind of pushed back off of a sloped street back into the trees, we actually don't have any immediate residential adjacency. We've got a tree canopy, a tree screen along the dart line, and then we've got a forested edge that thankfully is screening gas stations, liquor stores, and storage facilities. And then we've got White Rock Creek. There is not, there is one, you can see in the view here, the Highland on the Creek and Enclave at White Rock are the two obviously most recent and by a long shot the most dense neighborhood developments that have occurred anywhere within this area for a long time. We have always been sensitive to the relationship there for one primary reason. They're the only people that actually even look generally in the direction of what we're talking about. Now, 1,000 and 1,500 feet away. And so we are interested to meet with them. We want to meet with them. We want to help them understand our vision. We want to understand their concerns. But from the very beginning, we identified that and have tried to be thoughtful and responsive to that. Most of what I want to point out here simply is the pattern of land use. So here is the Garland Road perspective. The dashed line represents approximately the roof line of the building that we're proposing at 85 feet, which is a mid-rise building. This is not a high-rise building. It's a mid-rise building. That is the approximate height that you would see after you pass through the intersection at San Fernando and you begin down the spillway. We all know from driving down the spillway, walking down the spillway, or riding our bikes that, particularly riding your bikes, that's where you have to apply your brakes. That's where the accident can happen. Well, it's because there's a precipitous decline, right, in the topography that fundamentally changes the entire experience, especially if a building, in our case, is at the bottom of that and pushed away from the orientation of that view. On the top of this image, importantly, are those same landmarks that we referenced before, squeezed together into a section that allows us to understand the relative height of those buildings compared to what we are proposing. This is where I am referencing. The Drake is a roughly 75-foot tall building. Because it sits about 35 feet up the hill from us, the net effect with what we're proposing, even at 85 feet, is a building that is 30 feet lower on the horizon line or from any regional topographical perspective, including the direction from the people that are on the creek side and anywhere else around the property. Similarly, less important, but I think relevant reference is the Casa Linda Church. That's only a 3-story building. The fact of the matter is that it sits so much higher up on Garland Road that its visibility from the lake or from the west side of the lake is going to be far more prominent and visible. And it's right up against the street. People will see it for a long time as they approach the site. And so these things hopefully just kind of reframe where we're headed. So what's the vision? What's my time? Am I over? The vision of the project started with the images that all are familiar to you. A lifestyle that we love, that's about gathering and about natural settings, about recreation, about 100-year landmarks. These are the things that that draw us here. These are the things that kept us and our families here. They're also the things that are going to draw our residents here. many of whom we think are the people that are on this call. We are not building small units for the same people that want to be near bars, restaurants, and employment centers that we would build in Uptown Dallas or on Ross Avenue or in Deep Ellum. We are targeting a group of people ultimately that we don't think have much of an option, really haven't had one in about 20 years. People that are already here, empty nesters, downsizers, mature and established singles who could benefit from selling their house but don't want to leave their neighborhood. Newly married couples, remodelers that have nowhere to go. Many of us have had that experience or had friends that have had an experience, and the options are scant. Relocated parents that want to be near their children and their grandparents. None of those options from our perspective have really existed in some time. All of those create, we think, a remarkable opportunity. So our unit sizes are planned to be over 1,000 square feet on average, which is easily 20% larger than what you would see as the urban average in Dallas. What's the architecture as we think about it? Hardest part of this thing for us. Everybody starting now wants to see what's it going to look like. We all have different views on architecture, but we all start with the same set of images in our mind, right? The 100-year-old buildings around the lake, obviously Woodrow Wilson, the Hutzel houses, other Spanish colonial revival inspired architecture that probably is the most prevailing form of single family architecture and is kind of picked up in some of the elements of Lakewood Country Club and certainly in Casa Linda Plaza. The deco inspiration that surrounds the lake, the 20s and 30s projects, the Arboretum we have studied, right? And you've got quite a diversity of architecture in the Arboretum that started with the camp house actually first that John Staub designed. Then it became the de Goyler House, which we all know quite well, but is very interesting when you study it as to form. More recently, the Lake Flato, far more modern arrival pavilion and other structures, and the Buchanan Architects new test kitchen pavilion. These are fabulously designed spaces and projects, very much designed with the context of the landscape in mind, but they're not all classic. And so what we want to commit to and want everybody to know is we're inspired by this stuff. And what we're going to do is going to be rooted in the neighborhood, and we are going to commit to lasting and enduring quality. Those are our focuses, whether it is something that has a Mediterranean sort of bent to it, or it is something that is more transitional. Those are things we can work through, and we ultimately will probably want some reaction to. But scale and use and height and traffic, those are things that we want to talk about and work through in the zoning. And this is more important to us than the other stuff, right? It's the green spaces and the lush spaces that connect us, that connect our neighborhoods, that connect us to the trails and the open spaces. Those are the things that are inspiring us. Those are the things that we want to bring outside. Those are the things we want climbing up the building, even as we layer it and pull it away from 3G intersection. So how are we going to do that? This is our site plan. This is evolving. We have been in a feedback environment, trying to share ideas and thoughts, respond to questions, and ultimately have the opportunity to take people's feedback and incorporate it. It has not been, here's the plan, take it or leave it. We're going to ramrod this thing through. That has never been the idea or the expectation. When we move to the open houses, it will still be an open environment, hence open houses. But you will see further refinement to what you see on the screen as a result of a lot of the feedback that we have gotten already. But the big ideas that I want to point out here, we want to pull away from 3G. 3G is pushing away from us with the new alignment. The speedway bypass lane goes away. That is a wonderful thing. We don't take a position on the 3G debate. But at this point, that is our design reality to design into. And I can simply say, stand in the parking lot of the lot with me and watch the traffic go by and think about anything getting developed on this site, whether it's this or whether it's pharmacies and drive-throughs or anything else. The elimination of that bypass lane is an important thing that is going to calm traffic down. And that combined with the crossing infrastructure, lights, curb ramps, traffic, painted striping, will facilitate an environment where somebody would actually consider crossing the street. I would tell you, in our opinion, we got to give them a reason to, which either means you got to put them on one side of the street and then have them have a desire to get to the other side, or vice versa. We think that together with that new 3G infrastructure alignment and the project that really attempts to pull away from the intersection, make it comfortable, light, open volume, very clear sight lines to the trail, a celebrated trail connection for bikes and pedestrians, right? A very easy, what we call throat, that funnels people into the site intuitively, so there isn't a traffic problem that we've experienced for a long time with the dreaded U-turn up the hill to get back into the lot property and the forced right turn is the only option coming out of it. By combining these two together, creating an upper driveway and a lower driveway, pulling the scale back and having this little building that you see at the corner that we call the Jewel Building. We anticipate that being a restaurant predominantly. We have not made commitments on what kind of restaurant that is, but it will not be a chain. It will not be a drive-through. It will be a restaurant for and about this neighborhood. We anticipate having restaurants or some sort of food and beverage in the three areas that you see in pink to ultimately connect a plaza together. There's a lot of topography that's happening in here, and so we don't have the geometry of Smoky Rows, but that's been part of our expectation and vision, is to create enough of a buffer and a space in between these buildings away from the intersection, that this is a place where neighbors can come and meet, where they do gather. And so the idea of a restaurant in the base of this building, and I should be clear, that pink building we call the Finger, that reaches out towards the street. That has 5 levels above 1 level of retail. So it's 6 stories at that point. And at the top levels, it steps back. And the idea is to create these terraces with greenery that spills over them. But in the ground floor of that, we expect some form of restaurant. We expect that this Jewel Building would be 2 stories. Because of the grade, it could be a combination of 1 and 2 stories, but it's entirely expected to be a food and beverage environment. And then we expect some sort of a cafe, coffee, not a branded high volume coffee shop, more of a independent coffee shop that may have sort of a intentional co-work component to it, perhaps has wine at night. But the idea of creating an environment here that's activated and that pulls people into the site and begins to pull them into and off of the trail. The inspiration here is about the landscape that surrounds the building and treating the lawn and our connection and adjacency to the trail as our great street. So if there are 3 big ideas I would want to impress on this group, it is that we want to pull away from the 3G intersection, limit that scale so that it doesn't feel like it's hovering out over the intersection. It feels like it's pulled back and restrained, and instead shift the building and orient the building's kind of activation along the trail, the way we would if there were a great street next to us. And Mark Meyer, who's not on the call, deserves great credit here. Early on, he said, the most important thing here, we got to treat the Santa Fe Trail as our great urban street. And if we do that, and we could remember to do that, and we activate that whole edge along there, the opportunity to really celebrate that trail and do something really great here, and pull that activation kind of within the treed experience and this kind of forested experience, we can really do something wonderful. This is just a zoom in on that to let you see a little bit better. Some of the imagery begins to relate. I'm happy to pull this back up in Q&A. I know I need to kind of slow down and I got to hit some traffic stuff real quickly. What you see in these numbers here are the uses that we have thought that might achieve our real objective. So it tends to be people's response to need to understand and or want to provide feedback on retail and restaurants or different uses. What we are trying to communicate is we want to activate that entire edge along the trail. That's our goal. Direct access, a community room on the south side is what we've envisioned here for Friends of Santa Fe Trail, and even chamber meetings to happen that are kind of back amongst this treed grove that is a tree kind of area that we love and that we want to protect. A bike shop, we'd love to have a bike shop pulled further down the building closer to the trail. But the commitment is about creating active uses, restaurants that become some sort of a gift back in the absence of local traveler and the lot, something oriented to this neighborhood that then transition to uses that are active, trail-oriented type stuff, wellness-oriented things that come down this trail experience. This is a peek ahead at what you're going to see at the open house. We are still teasing this out more, but it represents the evolution of our feedback and the greater refinement of our plans. There's a tremendous amount of nod to the Lake and Garden District and the Arboretum in these plans, and we look forward to sharing that more with people. I want to point out that the red line that you see on the screen, that's the property line. So if you recall previously, there's quite a bit of open space or flat ground next to our property that we think is just a wonderful opportunity without a tremendous amount of investment. to create a wonderful trailhead that can do more than just be a trail connection to our project into this node, but actually be a real gift to the community. And so we want feedback on those ideas. We're talking to the various people there to help us understand that. This gives you a quick glimpse of where we're trying to go with the plaza design to sort of mitigate three things. One, we got a lot of topography that is happening falling within this plaza area. Two, we want to create a landscape buffer that harkens to the Lake and Garden District and the Arboretum and the trees behind. And three, we want to use this jewel building as a gathering place that also sort of sits in this rug out towards 3G and separates the larger building, the main building, which at all these levels would be 6 stories. At this point, it is conceived as ground floor uses that will be restaurants, retail, or double height multifamily community space within 5 stories of apartments on top of that. The garage here has over 400 parking spaces in the garage. It is 2 levels of garage, about 2.5 buried into the ground and pushed into the side of the hill. That is has been a challenging exercise. As some of you might expect, the topography combined with the geology from the lake or from the rock that surrounds the lake was a real exercise to try to figure out how to actually take a building and push it into the ground and push it into the hill. But we ultimately feel like we unlocked that. A nod that we're interested in making at our main trail connection, we've called it Parakeet Plaza. Many of you may know about the East Dallas Parakeets. I'll admit I didn't until about 4 months ago. We don't want to take that too far, and yet we think it's perfectly quirky and interesting and fun. And so working with Friends of Santa Fe Trail with a proper trail marker for the Santa Fe Trail that becomes a real visual threshold, but also a space that can have some kind of gathering around it that is a little bit of an homage to this quirky bird in East Dallas has been a part of our plans for some time. Finally, traffic. Our approach to traffic started with bikes and cyclists. The idea, we know people are afraid of cars. We're going to talk about that. That requires a degree of trust in standard traffic data that is used to and collaborated on with the city to work through information. But if we're going to really do a trail-oriented development and really push the notion of active transportation, we had to understand how can we get people from within our property, from without our property, and beyond our property. How do we get them to circulate? Where's bike parking? How do we cut through and create porosity and portals and actually encourage people to cross the street, the unthinkable? But you could live here, go downstairs for Thai food, walk across the street to go to the grocery store, take your pet up the street or across the street to the pet shop, either one of the pet shops, get pizza, catty corner across the street, and you never have to get in your car. That's a real probability for us, but we really got to think through it. And so I draw your attention to the right side of this. One of our planning adjustments has been to expand, to eliminate parking along that edge and instead create a 12-foot clear zone or a 12-foot zone with street trees, planting, lights, and benches, and then 8 feet of clear space to get bikes and pedestrians from the trail up to the intersection where they then can ultimately distribute across the intersection and into the neighborhood. Finally, the cars. This is simply a demonstration. I think most of you would understand that we do, as a matter of course, we have to do this. We completed a traffic impact study, a draft version, reviewed it in great detail with the city's transportation department. We went back and revised it. We changed our plans. And in November of last year, we nailed down what our go forward plan is and presented that. It is detailed. There's going to be more information shared in the open house as it relates to this. This is done by transportation officials, planners in the city, and our own consultants and planners using accepted industry standard data. What I want to point out are a couple of important things. One is 3G creates a different situation. So on your left, you've got what we've all experienced, and my kids spent a lot of time at the lot. You had 2 sites not connected. You had no way to get into effectively either one, but certainly not the lot if you were coming from any point on Gaston or Garland, but to go up the hill, complete the dreaded U-turn facing down the hill into the oncoming speedway. You then, in order to get to the local traveler property, or if there weren't parking in the front of the lot, you had to drive around. Now, you never knew it, but you were driving on dark property as you drove through alongside those trees. And then you ultimately parked in the back in this open sort of space that exists back there behind these 2 buildings. With 3G, a number of things happen. the bypass lane gets eliminated. That's a critically important thing. It fundamentally changes, I think, the safety environment. And that, again, is not a note of advocacy for the outcome there. It is simply the elimination of the bypass lane is a very good thing. It also, by taking both sites together and combining them and connecting an upper driveway to a lower driveway, we eliminate the need for the U-turn. We can distribute traffic from within the property to either one of the driveways, and we are connecting the garage entrances on both sides of the site to make sure that it is intuitive and it is easy to arrive at the property, park, get out, and go into the retail plaza or along the trail, the trail uses, get back into your car. And if you want to go towards 30, you leave one way, and if you want to go towards the Arboretum, then you leave the other way. The other thing two things that it does at 3G, we don't have the pretty colors on it here, but it creates a pretty substantial green buffer by flaring out the curb line. Well, two things. It flares out the intersection, and then in that space, it also creates these median bump outs that are planted green space. So two things accomplish it. One, the dimension or the separation between where the actual intersection occurs, which will be at dramatically lower speeds and moving in organized chunks of traffic, is happening much further away from the site. And then we are taking our main building, only 6 stories at that area, pulling it even further away. The other thing that it does is it creates this kind of green buffer that is really important from our perspective, because that just speaks further to this environment we want to create that points people's minds and their eyes and their wheels to the trail and to the trees. Not until they get back amongst those trees do they understand or really feel the presence of this building. That's the idea. This begins to take a look at my final comment. We have taken a look at what the use generation, the trip generations are, called the traffic impacts of different kinds of uses. And there's some sensitivity around this because we've always wanted to be very careful that we weren't perceived as, as some sort of making some sort of a threat. And by no means is that it. We are mixed use developers. We're not retail developers. But the economic value of even a portion of this site, based on historical patterns of development in this area, is very easy to understand, and the uses are allowable by right. So we simply wanted to develop, hey, if you ended up with a pharmacy and 2 drive-throughs, it's only 20,000 square feet of retail space. But if you ended up with those 2 things, which probably would only take half the site, what would the traffic impacts be? And how does that compare to 320 units of apartments on a trail and up to 13,600 square feet of retail, which is currently what we have called out, of which only 10,000 feet of that would be restaurants, neither of which would be drive-through restaurants of any kind. And based on feedback that we get from the community about what kind of businesses and what kind of restaurants they want to see, we would be happy to adjust that number down. We're committed to the uses and the experiences, and an organization of a site that accommodates all these things we're talking about. Then we are trying to solve for an economic formula related to a certain amount of retail. What we do know is that mixed use projects have the opportunity to synergize and share traffic in ways that other uses do not. This allows you at the end of the day to see this is the trip generation of approximately 20,000 square feet of retail if it were on this site, 1 pharmacy, 2 drive-through restaurants, which would take up together maybe 2 acres of the 3.88. Next to that is what we're proposing without any capture at all for the fact that it's a mixed use project with on-site retail and across the street retail. And if you factor that in further, you see that trip generation drop more meaningful. This is something that some people have a hard time accepting, and we're ready to talk to people about it. It's not easy to kind of talk through, but at the end of the day, I think what matters to us, or what we have sort of settled on, is the alignment is far better than it was. The proposal is far better than it could be. And the synergy and the opportunity, which we're not even accounting for how people choose to live and work going forward, and the evolution of our trails and our mobility plans and the parks around us, none of that's being accounted for. The synergy there is pretty awesome. The synergy with the alternative hadn't existed, and it won't. And so we think at the end of the day, that does become a real part of the story. So Brad, I think I'm going to stop there. I think I went over meaningfully.
Well, it's a good thing you did, because a lot of the last chunk of time that you spent answered many of the questions that we got. We got quite a few good questions, but I've been kind of striking through them as you've touched on them. A lot of them obviously about 3G and how the redesign of 3G would be factored in. It sounds like y'all are conscious of that, trying not to make it a big, huge, cliff, if you will, right there at 3G, where there's this huge imposing building that you're designing that to try to pull back from the intersection. And then as the intersection actually pulls back from you, it'll be even less noticeable there. We had questions about traffic studies, which you just talked about, whether, if you were not to get the zoning approval, what type of realistically, what type of field businesses and services would go in there. I think ideally everybody would, love the idea of having, neighborhood restaurants there, but that's not necessarily what is going to be able to spend the most money to be able to purchase that price, if not, your mixed use project there. So we had questions about whether or not you've investigated the possibility of buying that little triangular skate shop spot right there, I think owned by Jeff Ferry. I know in my conversations with you, you've mentioned that, but would you just touch on that real quick?
Sure, yeah. Jeff Ferry owns that property. We've met with Jeff. Jeff's a great guy, very interesting. We met with him early on, and he wasn't interested in selling, and we were not trying, candidly, to buy the property. 3.8 acres is plenty. And we had quite a site to try to figure out how to carve access into and make it all work. But also, when we met with him the first time, Jeff has some really interesting ideas and plans. And so he talked about some stuff that would be sort of trail oriented, outdoor, upscale, beer garden type uses. And, candidly, from our perspective, already knowing that we really were desiring to buy both properties and rezone them, in part because that way we could pull away from the intersection. If we just tried to do something on the lot with the existing zoning, nobody's going to be able to create that density to pay more than a pharmacy or a drive-through can pay without jamming it right up to the street. And so when we talked to him and we wanted to create this smaller jewel building, and then we hear that's oriented towards the trail, and then we hear he's thinking that he might do something that kind of sounds like that, we were like, you know what, let's stay in communication. Rob is working with him. People in the community may see some stuff come forward from Jeff, but we're committed to collaborating and coordinating, but it's not part of the request.
Perfect. You referenced Friends of Santa Fe Trail. I used to be actively involved. I'm on more of the advisory committee. I've heard from their side that they've been very happy with y'all's willingness to work with them to do that. And I also just want to share our appreciation as the East Dallas Chamber for all of you working with us to help build this future. It's not a this is it, take it or leave it type of deal. You're actively seeking the feedback from us to help build what this could be. So we really do appreciate that. How many of these meetings do y'all have scheduled and or already completed? I know you've got a few of them.
A lot. I think we're tracking at about 35 or 36 now. We've got 5 more this week, 3 open houses, and so we'll be well past 40 by this time, effectively this time next week. But I if anything, Brad, hopefully that is a commitment to what you just mentioned, right? That we're not looking for sympathy and we're not looking for concurrence on that basis. We have not asked. I think it is fair to say that we haven't asked anybody in any one of those meetings for their support.
Right.
We've asked for their ideas.
Right.
We've asked for their responses. And a lot of them are going to see a lot of things reflected in what they ultimately see. But we've also had conversations with them that were lengthy like this because there is a lot of context. And nobody's made these kinds of investments.
Right.
In this area. And this is part of the gauntlet to do that. So we're ready for that. It's not a surprise.
Sure. I hope you'll have a voice after all these, and I know you said some of your team members are going to be stepping up with some of these as well. So I know how much of a challenge some of these public input meetings can be, but it really is a testament that y'all are actively seeking the input from the community.
Well,
One thing,
I have to
or a
say,
couple. Oh, go
Brad, I
ahead.
have to say that I feel like it looked like I've been sweating this whole time. And this is the most formal of any meetings that we've had. And so I felt obligated to put on my blazer, and I'm going to blame it on that, um, I hadn't had to put the blazer on in about a year. So all of a sudden I'm overheated.
Looking sharp. So I'll just I'll touch on a couple of things that I noticed and give you a chance to cool down and grab some water. And we want to thank everybody that's attended. We had a great turnout today. I know early on we had something like almost 90 people register for the webinar. I'd have to go back and look at the final numbers, but things that stuck out in my head from your presentation are the fact that this site sits somewhat in a valley. You called it a bathtub, a valley. While you were talking, I was checking to see if I could find the topography there, and it looked like somewhere in the range of about 50 feet difference. I think you referenced maybe 35 in elevation from the Drake at the top of the hill and the site project there. So that's interesting, and the fact that it's pulled back will also help, I think, with the perception of the scale from 3G. I liked the fact that y'all are trying to maintain as much of the green space as you are. That's a big thing for me. My fear early on was that this was going to come through and just clear cut everything and just be a wall of concrete. But this is I like what you're doing there. And just your attention to how this, and I think this is a testament, honestly, for the fact that you've assembled a team from the area, that you're trying to be respectful and responsible to the impact of East Dallas and our uniqueness. We're the most unique part of Dallas, just ask us, we'll tell you. I've been here for 11 years now, and it's been, I can't imagine living anywhere else, but it speaks volumes that you are trying to be responsible to make sure that this feels like a part of a community, not just something that's thrown in here. So one other question I got was about your presentation. I know that it's kind of a living, breathing document, and I'm sure as you get feedback, it changes. Is there some component of it that you can share with us that I can, make available for ours? Or I don't know if you've got a pared down version that is something we can show, or at what point we'll be able to see something. I know different screen sizes show things differently. So
Yes. So this has been one of the most challenging things, and I don't know who was on the call that I've had conversations with before or that have asked that question and been bothered with the response. There's one easy way to answer it, which has kind of always been our thinking, is that when we get to the open houses, we are transitioning from conversations and feedback to much more, this is the incorporation and the vision. Here's what it's going to look like. These are more of the details, right? And so my expectation has always been that while we fully expect after that to then have more iteration that respond to the feedback that we get in the open houses, that is the point where we're going to try to use one phrase, put pencils down. I have got 40 versions of this thing. And for better or for worse, we get a question, right? Gloria Tarpley asks about whether we ought to have a traffic light and do a traffic warrant study. We dive off into that and we go develop that study and we think through that and we have conversations with the city. I'm sorry to mention that name, but just different people bring up things and we go and we study them. And then the next time it's a different presentation, right? And so that's what's made it very challenging, is that we are in the feedback zone. We haven't been, here it is, take it or leave it, look through it, criticize it, and let us know. It's been, let's have a conversation about it. But we're moving to that point, and I think the open houses are that point where we'll be in a position to just share, because at least we'll know that while it may change from that point, that will be a milestone kind of time frame, that it should incorporate the main tenets of what we expect to be moving forward with, subject to some further refinement, where this has been just sort of an ongoing thing. So Brad, that's one thought. The
Sure.
other is, if there's just a hell of a lot of pressure from you all and other people to have something in the next 4 days, then I think we can go down and create sort of a pared down version. I've been advised not to do that because they just become dynamic, and then something that is 2 months old that isn't relevant anymore gets kind of used or distributed, and we just wanted to be careful about that.
I can appreciate that. I understand the, like I said, the living, breathing nature of this and how it is organic there. We're way over our normally scheduled time, but because we're virtual, anybody that has been able to stick around has been great. We still have a bunch of folks on there. We will put out the information, share the information for your upcoming meetings, your open house. We want to thank you, Michael, and thank the team for all of your willingness to work with us on this, to share this with us. We're really looking forward to being an active part of the project and making sure that this is something that we all like and enjoy in the future. With that, I'll conclude that part, and I'll just do a little housekeeping of our own. So I neglected to mention, I got several messages. I neglected to introduce myself on the outset here. I'm Brad Grist. I'm the 2021 chair of the Greater East Dallas Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. So I've lived in Dallas, as I said, in East Dallas for the last 11 years. I'm in Forest Hills specifically, and so this project is something that I've been paying very close attention to. If you would like additional information on this project, we will have contact information. I think it may already be out there for Michael and your team. You can reach out to us, info@eastdallaschamber.com, and we can provide additional information. And if you'd like more content like this or have ideas for other programs like this, we're always open to ideas. So feel free to reach out. And we welcome everyone to join us as a chamber member, because we're trying to provide this type of content and this type of value for the area. So we have our next meeting, our next luncheon, I believe is March 23rd. We'll have some details coming out about it later. Generally, it is a kind of a 3-tier approach to how COVID-19 has impacted East Dallas. I know we're going to have the education side, healthcare side, and the economic side. So it's kind of a roundtable that we will have on March 23rd. We'll send out additional information here soon, but it should be a very interesting presentation. With that, I want to thank everybody for their time and attention today, and we really look forward to see what comes of this. Everybody have a great day.